1829, a hillside south of the Oyo heartland, no name for this place yet. People from Oyo, Egba, Ife, Ijebu began gathering on a defensible hill. Many were strangers, refugees fleeing from different wars and collapsing kingdoms. No one had planned to build a city. They were simply tired of running and the hill offered safety. At first, it was only a temporary refuge. But within a generation, that hillside settlement became one of the largest cities in West Africa. What began as a refuge grew into a powerful city that commanded armies, collected tributes from older kingdoms, and reshaped the political order of Yorubaland. That first night, none of that existed. There was only a hill, small fire, and strangers that never met before, resting after long journeys. Somehow, without any formal decision, they stayed. This is the story of what that staying eventually became. Welcome back to Yoruba History, Identity, and the In-Between. I am Dr. Zach Shitu. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. Season 1 covers the 19th century, a period of extraordinary mayhem across Yorubaland. In episode 1, we traced how Oyo, one of the West Africa's greatest empire, came apart from inside. Today, we follow what came after. Here's a question I return to constantly in history and in my work as a systems architect. What do people actually build when old structures are gone? Not what they intend to build, but what actually emerges when crisis strips everything back to survival. Ibadan is one of the most compelling answers I've found. A refugee camp with no royal lineage, no sacred authority, no founding mythology that became a military state, governing hundreds of thousands. Ibadan didn't just inherit power, it built it from nothing. Between 1810 and 1830s, hundreds of thousands of people fled southward from the Fulani forces raiding out of Ilorin, away from provincial forces that broke out as former Oyo territories turned on each other, away from slave raids, moving freely through the chaos. People abandoned ancestral homes, lost everything they couldn't carry, and moved with no clear destination. Around 1829, a war camp took shape on an elevated ground, defensible enough to trade routes to stay supplied. Refugees from multiple Yoruba groups gathered there for mutual protection. Most assumed it was temporary. When conditions stabilized, they would go back home. But that stability never came. Traditional Yoruba towns centered on a single founding lineage whose ancestry gave them uncontested authority. Ibadan had no such foundation. It drew from across Yorubaland, people from Bu, Ekiti, and Ondo, and even some Hausa and Nupe. Political authority would have to be built from ground up. The question here is, on what basis would political authority be built? The answer came quickly: survival. The camp's primary function was defense, repelling Fulani raids from the north, holding off rival Yoruba states raiding for supplies when trade routes failed. In that environment, military effectiveness determined everything. The man who could organize defense, lead campaigns, bring people back home from wars, or small raid had authority. He earned it, regardless of his father's title or his grandfather's name. That was the seed of Ibadan's political culture. Authority through performance rather than inherited through birth. In the context of Yoruba history, this was a radical idea. You see, in traditional Yoruba political culture, the Oba was irreplaceable. He embodied the connection between the living community and ancestors. His authority rested on ritual as much as on politics. Remove the Oba, and you didn't just lose a leader, you lost the moral center of the community. Ibadan rejected this entirely. In place of a king, it had military commanders or war chiefs that led the army. A council of chiefs who earned their position through battlefield performance governed the city. Above politics, there was no ritual authority, only the outcome of last campaign. Two reasons explain the absence of a king. One, practical. No single lineage to claim unchallenged authority by a population drawn from everywhere. And the second was ideological. The sacred kingship model had just failed. Why rebuild the same system? In place of royal hierarchy, Ibadan built military hierarchy with clear steps. Junior warriors fought on the front lines. Those who succeeded and accumulated wealth from raiding built personal followings and developed reputations. Sustained success brought promotion to war chief, Mogaji or Balogun, commanding sections of the army. Senior chiefs formed the ruling council. Now, at the apex sat a Bale, a nominal head who presided but did not rule absolutely. Advancement required three things. One, military success, winning battles, taking towns, bringing wealth back. Two, a following, distributing spoils of war generously to attract loyal supporters. And three, political skills, forming alliances, reading when to press on and when to wait. In Ibadan, a man's father's title gave him nothing. Ambitious warriors built large agboles or household filled with family members, adopted sons, war captives, integrated as dependents and clients seeking protection. A chief's power derived from the size and loyalty of his household. Military defeat or political failure could strip him of his authority almost overnight. In hereditary systems, royal families retained status even through sustained failure. But in Ibadan, you are only as powerful as the people who stood with you. Women held real informal power in a formerly male-dominated system. Managing large household economies required skilled organization and financial judgments. Women built intelligent networks across the cities. They knew who was rising and who was losing favor. Strategic marriages created political alliances as significant as battlefield outcomes. Traditional kingdoms had a queen mother institution that gave senior women formal political standing, but Ibadan had no equivalence. Ibadan's system was efficient for warfare. It rewarded skill and punished failure. In that century, military effectiveness meant survival, and this was by design. It was also deeply unstable. Chiefs maneuvered constantly against each other. Political assassinations occurred. Military setback produced rapid shift at the top. The system just ran on raw power and permanently contested. Ibadan was formidable in war, but volatile in peace. That tension would define Ibadan's entire history. Ibadan's rise was built on military success, Three conflicts in particular defined what it became. First was the Fulani Wars between 1830s and 1840s. Ibadan's early reputation came from defending Yoruba against Fulani expansion out of Ilorin. The defensive movement was the Battle of Oshogbo in 1840. Ibadan forces had allied with other Yoruba states, met the Fulani cavalry pushing from north, and stopped them. The impact went beyond tactical. Oyo's cavalry had been the region's dominant forces. Now that cavalry was gone. Fulani cavalry now threatening Ibadan's survival using similar tactics. Ibadan infantry, organized differently, proved they could win when the old system had failed, and that argument was settled, at least for a generation. 2. Rivalry with Ijaye. Between 1850s and 1862, Ijaye was led by Kurunmi, who had the title of Are-Ona-Kakanfo, the supreme military commander of the old Oyo system. He stood for everything Ibadan walked away from: inherited titles, sacred authority, power that came from ritual rank rather than battlefield results. The conflict between the two was never just about territory. It was a contest of two different ideas. The Ijaye War settled it by force. Ibadan won, Kurunmi died, and the Are-Ona-Kakanfo's title, the most feared in Yorubaland, never recovered its standing. The Oyo model had lost twice. The third, the Ekitiparapo, otherwise known in collective memory as the Ijaye War, between 1877 and 1893. By the 1870s, Ibadan was the dominant power in Yorubaland. Dominance brought new problems. Military success had made it expansionist and extractive. It demanded tribute, interfered with small state affairs, and used force to maintain position it had long ago stopped earning through performance. The system built on earned authority, now relying on coercion. The Ekitiparapo or Ekiti Unite coalition formed in 1877. Smaller states, Ekiti, Jesha, Egba, Ijebu, allied specifically against Ibadan's dominance. The war lasted 16 years. Ibadan couldn't break the coalition decisively, and the coalition couldn't destroy Ibadan. It became a grinding stalemate, and the Yoruba state was left exhausted. British intervention in 1893 imposed the settlement that either side could not achieve on its own. The war exposed the fundamental limitation of Ibadan's strategy. Military dominance alone could not create long-standing political order. The very qualities that built Ibadan eventually turned the rest of Yorubaland against it. Constant mobilization strained the economy. Warfare disrupted trade. Slavery used to finance campaigns created contradictions that Ibadan could not resolve. Expansion created enemies faster than it created allies. Ibadan proved that Yoruba politics could function at scale without sacred king. By the 1850s and 1860s, it held over 100,000 people, one of the largest cities in West Africa. It organized itself, defended itself, administered territory, conducted diplomacy, managed trade. All this without an Oba at the center. The sacred king, however culturally important, was structurally unnecessary. Ibadan's hierarchy system had genuine strength. Social mobility was real. A man could rise from nothing to significant power through skill and judgment. Rewarding competence over birth order produced effective military leadership. The absence of rigid traditional institution meant that Ibadan could adapt itself to changing circumstances. But the limits were also real. Power struggles were constant with no framework to contain them. Military merit in itself required continuous warfare to prove and maintain. The definition of merit in itself was too narrow to battlefield outcome and excluded what community actually needed to function. Meritocracy without shared values, without care for those who lose, is not justice. However, Ibadan created something new in Yoruba politics, an identity based on participation rather than lineage. You were Ibadan because you lived there. You were Ibadan because you fought for the city. You were Ibadan because you engaged in its political culture. Citizenship defined by what you did and not where you came from. In the 19th century Yoruba politics, this was genuinely a modern idea. Ibadan pioneered a fusion of military and commercial power that left lasting marks on Nigerian political economy. Military success generated wealth, captives, tributes, trade, and financed future campaigns. Commercial standing and political standing reinforced each other. The pattern of linking armed power to economic accumulation became a recurring feature in Nigerian political life. Ibadan's deepest lesson for Yoruba political culture was pragmatic. What worked for Oyo didn't work in the 19th century conditions. Sometimes, the bravest thing a society can do is to admit that old systems no longer work and build something new. This instinct for adaptation explains why Yoruba communities engaged so quickly with colonial administration, party politics in the 50s, and Nigeria federalism. This pattern has long history behind it. By the 1850s, the British were pushing inland from Lagos. They found Yorubaland depleted. Decades of warfare had strained the population, disrupted agriculture, fractured political cohesion. Once most Yoruba states, including Ibadan, accepted the offer of British peace, the British system assumed administrative control, and Ibadan chiefs became colonial-era native authorities. Authority now came from British backing, not battlefield performance. Titles effectively became hereditary, the very thing Ibadan had rejected. In 1930s, British administrators and Ibadan elites created the title of Olubadan, the king of Ibadan, a city that had built its entire identity on rejection of sacred kingship now had a king. Why? British preference for traditional rulers they could govern through. The Ibadan elites wanting the prestige and stability that royal symbolism offered. Political maneuverings by factions who stood to gain. The Olubadan title followed the old military hierarchy, though, rotating chiefs upward through earned seniority, but wrapped in royal ceremony. A meritocratic leader dressed in a king's robe, presented as ancient tradition. But this was entirely new. Inheritance in modern Yoruba politics runs deep in two directions. On one side, pragmatism over respect for demonstrated competence, comfort, institutional change, and democratic instance, favoring consultation over autocracy. And on the other hand, factional conflict and competition over resources that can tip into instability, a narrow definition of merit that determine who gets counted and who doesn't. Both directions trace back to the refugee camp that became a military republic. What was built in necessity, in survival, and in radical absence of tradition became effectively tradition. That's Ibadan's legacy. Ibadan, 1900. The wars are over. The British have pacified the interior. And the city that spent a century refusing to be governed is now at last administered. Imagine Ogumola, the son of a refugee farmer, the warrior who grew up knowing no system, but the one that Ibadan had built from nothing. Now an elderly chief, hearing the news that Ibadan will have a king, not because anyone earned the title, but because the British want a traditional ruler to administer through, and Ibadan elites want the prestige because it's convenient. He had watched Ibadan survive without a king, watched it build the largest city in Yorubaland on the argument that power had to be earned, and no man could be born into it. Now, titles will pass to sons again. Not because the old system had proven itself, but because new masters found it useful. This is the final irony of Ibadan's story. A city that built its own identity on the rejection of a sacred king ended up with a sacred king. Old mistakes, new titles. Àgbà ò pẹ́ lórí ìgbà, àgbà ń pẹ́ lórí ìmọ̀. A person is not an elder because of age, but because of wisdom and knowledge. Ibadan showed what meritocracy without moral constraints produces. Without shared values, without genuine concerns for those who lose. A military state could win wars. It couldn't answer the harder questions. Can efficiency replace meaning? Can achievement-based authority build stable community? Ibadan asked those questions. It never fully answered them. When we talk about Yoruba political culture today, its pragmatism, its adaptability, its democratic instinct, its factional rivalries, we are talking about inheritances from Ibadan as much as from Oyo, from refugee camp to military state to modern city, from necessity to innovation to invented traditions. That's episode 2 of Yoruba History, Identity, and the In-Between, season 1, Ibadan, from refugee camp to military state. Next episode, the migration story. How Yoruba people used narratives of origin, movement, and settlement to construct political authority and cultural identity during the chaos of 19th century. Stories as politics, memory as power. That's next. If this episode has added something to how you think about history, power, or what gets built when everything is stripped away, subscribe on YouTube or your podcast apps, wherever you're listening. It costs nothing, and it means that this work reaches more people. Drop a comment. Does Ibadan remind you of anything in the modern world? A political movement, an institution reinventing itself after crisis. I'm not looking for tidy answers. I want real comparisons. Please share this episode with someone from the diaspora who's been told this history doesn't matter, with someone who thinks Africa's political thought has nothing to say to the modern world. Let the history speak for itself. I'm Dr. Zakshitu. This has been Yoruba History, Identity, and the In-Between. See you next time.